What is up, guys? T-Man here, and today I want to talk a little bit about the usage stats from US Internats this year and kind of use that as a platform to start talking about Worlds and start thinking about what might be doing well there. So I was at this tournament, of course. I did pretty well. Wish I did a little bit better on day 2, but 20th, I'll take it. Games were all pretty good in day 2, so no complaints there. I did play the Latias team that is up on the channel, so if you guys want to go check that out. My quality is a little bit off in that video, but we will have that fixed for this video, and if you want to go check it out anyways, it is on the channel. You can go ahead and check that out. But otherwise, I do want to start talking about US Internats. And going into this tournament, we had this, this wide open metagame, and we were all we're seeing these random braviary teams, top cutting events, and random things winning here and there. Chalk having a very, very good regional when Paul won with it. Brian also in top 4. So we have this very wide open metagame, not really sure what to expect. And as a player trying to prepare for a tournament, the worst thing in the world is having this big, wide open, diverse metagame. I know we always complain when we have Chalk winning in 2015, we have Grout and Xerneas in 2016 rather. These teams doing so well, and everyone's complaining about over centralization. But as a player preparing for a tournament, centralization is actually great because you're able to sit down and say, okay, I need to beat this, this, and this. And you can focus your team building around certain threats and trying to beat them. But so far in this format, that has been a small issue. A lot of times what people will do to kind of, still maintain the consistency in these kind of formats is just play whatever the best mega is. So I think the go-to this format has been Metagross, and we've seen people do that. We've seen it, win this Internats as well as, Internats before this, as well as regionals. So Metagross still the consistent answer, but the main thing that happened this tournament is it all got condensed down a little bit. We're still seeing the megas fluctuate all over the place. We have Metagross doing well. As a response to Metagross doing well, we're seeing Charizard and Gengar also be in similar ranges of usage, being up there. And then niche picks like Gardevoir and Kangaskhan, every Salamence here and there, but for the most part, it's those three. It's Metagross, Gengar, and Charizard, and it's mainly just because Metagross is the best mega. I think that's pretty much, undisputed at this point, but Gengar and Charizard do have, the tools and the super effective stabs to, help deal with Metagross. So, with these two things in mind, we have a very, very good look at Worlds. I know going into this tournament, a lot of us were afraid of, Charizard. Charizard was a Pokemon that, if you can build the perfect Charizard team, then you're gonna have this really unstoppable mon, because not a lot of people are running things like Heatran and Tyranitar that had some pretty good usage at this tournament and had some high placings. But across all of your teams, if you're not running one of those two mons, then you're relying on Landorus to hit its moves, and you're relying on stuff like Zapdos, which generally are running bulkier sets that won't be KOing Charizard. It's just doing a lot of damage to it. But if Charizard can put out Heat Wave and Flamethrower and overheat turn after turn, you're gonna have a lot of problems dealing with it. It's gonna take care of a lot of your team before you can deal with it. So preparing for Charizard, preparing for Gengar, preparing for Metagross going to this tournament is what most people plan to do, but those actually ended up being the Pokemon that did dominate this tournament. So that's actually a very, very good thing. I think a lot of us are happy to see something like that. The important thing to look at these teams, or not the mega evolutions though, is the Pokemon after that. So a stat that I found really, really cool is that 10 out of the 16 teams in top 16 have 3 out of 4 of a Tapu, Landorus, Incineroar, and Kartana. And on 7 out of those 10 teams, the Tapu was Tapu Fini, and the only teams that it wasn't Tapu Fini were on the Gardevoir teams, and that was always Tapu Koko. So that means that there is this, this archetype, this core of mons that is being used on a very wide variety of teams. The megas may vary, but the core basis of all these teams are staying the same. And this is another thing that I think is really, really important to look at going into Worlds. We have this core that, a lot of people are going to be running, and a lot of people are running it because of how consistent it is, how good it is. But, going into Worlds, I think that we have a chance to see some of these off-meta teams kind of rise up and do pretty well, just because we're in such a prime position to, you know, attack these teams, because you know, how condensed it is in these certain sets of mons that you can, you know, try and beat it with stuff like Charizard. I think Charizard is pretty good against most of the teams. Charizard plus Landorus is something that deals with effectively all 4 Pokemon in that core, with the exception of Tapu Fini. But, you know, Charizard is able to slow down Tapu Fini if it can't just beat it outright. So, you know, there's a couple different ways you can tackle, you know, trying to deal with this core of 3 to 4 mons. But for the most part, you know, because of how condensed the teams are, it's a very, very good opportunity for team builders to try and, you know, do something a little bit different. You know, of those 4 Pokemon, the Pokemon that I am most afraid of is actually Kartana. I think that Kartana is one of the most threatening, if not the most threatening Pokemon in the format, just because of all the different item choices it has. You can run Focus Sash, Assault Vest, and Z-Move are the ones that I would be afraid of. Sometimes instead of a Focus Sash, you'll see Berry on the Tailwind sets, but, you know, Tailwind sets with their Focus Sash or Berry, then Assault Vest, and then Z-Move. All 3 of these Kartana, you have to play around very, very different ways. You know, if you're playing against Assault Vest Kartana, you have to be aware that, you know, it can, you know, do big chunks to your Tapu Fini, your Incineroar with Sacred Sword, and opposing Kartana with Sacred Sword. So you have to be aware that you're not going to be able to just throw special attacks at it like you would be to other Kartana. But in the same vein, you can't just, you know, prep for these slow, bulky Kartanas, because something I did at Internats, I was playing against a pretty standard chalk team. You know, he had Jolly, max speed, or very, very fast Kartana. Not something I was prepared for, based off of how the chalk teams have been running their Kartanas going into the tournament, and just catches you off guard, and you lose a game because of that. And that's exactly what happened to me. And I think it is something that we have to be very, very aware of going into Worlds, because, you know, if you can only beat certain amounts of the Kartana, you're gonna run into teams in Swiss you just can't beat, because Kartana is that strong of a Pokemon. It can snowball that hard. So Kartana is definitely a Pokemon that I am pretty afraid of. Another Pokemon I want to talk about is Tapu Koko. Tapu Koko finally had another strong tournament after, you know, kind of falling off the map for quite a long time at the US Regionals, and you know, it didn't have a super strong day 2. You know, it only had, I think, the 2 or 3 placements inside the top 16 itself, and then across top 32, it's not really there. Top 64, it had a much stronger showing, and the usage was there, but as far as, like, you know, getting deep into the tournament, it's still not quite there. That being said, it's not a Pokemon that you can just, you know, forget about. A lot of teams do have a natural tool in Landorus to deal with it, whether it be Scarf being the most common Landorus, I think still, but of course Z-Move also being very, very common now, and I believe both of the finalists were running Tech Rage, so you know, both very, very important things to deal with. And because of how strong Tapu Koko is, despite its usage being kind of poor, you know, teams might opt to, you know, not care as much about Tapu Koko, but it's definitely something that people need to be aware of, because it is a Pokemon that still exists, and if enough people aren't prepping as hard for Tapu Koko because of its poor usage stats, then I think it can have a very, very strong tournament. It's just one of those mons. It's going to do as well as the field preps for it, right? Another thing I want to talk about is some of the Pokemon that didn't do too well here at US Internats. 2 mons in particular. One, Como. I think that, you know, I listed out those 4 mons before, and besides the Tapu slot, you know, Landorus, Kartana, and Incineroar, those are all mons that Como pretty much loves to face. If you're able to, you know, deal with the Tapu Fini, deal with the Tapu Lele, which has, you know, always been a problem for Como teams, one of the things they aim to do when building the team. If you can deal with the Tapu, Como is in a pretty prime position to, you know, take on a lot of these teams. So I think that that's pretty interesting. The other mon that I want to look at is Snorlax. Snorlax being, you know, one of the very, very strong snowball mons in the format. If you get up a belly drum, you're able to start firing off returns. A lot of teams will not be able to handle it. A lot of teams do have Incineroar. Incineroar being able to knock off making it very, very hard to use Snorlax. I do think that's part of the reason why it hasn't had as much success this year. But if most teams are just using Incineroar to, you know, beat that Snorlax, just to go for the knockoffs onto it, then that gives you a pretty interesting goal in team building. You can, you know, game plan to make a team that has a very, very good matchup against Incineroar. You want them to bring the Incineroar, and basically say, if you can, if you want to deal with my Snorlax, you have to bring your Incineroar, but I'm going to be bringing, like, for example, Drizzlemon. Say you're running Pelipper or Politoed, and then like a Landorus, and say, like, I have two things that are just going to blow up your Incineroar if you're going to bring it, and I'm also going to bring my Snorlax, so you have to be prepared for both. And I think that's something that so far the teams I've been seeing haven't been able to handle it quite as well. Kartana is also something that does a decent amount to Snorlax with Sacred Swords, can 2 KO it unintimidated, as well as, you know, Kartana takes a +6 return. So with these two things in mind, you know, there are other things besides the Incineroar, but the Incineroar being the main thing that you have to beat. So if you're able to do that, I think Snorlax is in a pretty cool spot. I don't know exactly if it'll do that well at Worlds, just because I think for the same reason why it hasn't done well a lot this year. I think Incineroar, despite being something you can team build for, is a very strong Pokemon that you have to be afraid of knockoff. As far as what I think is going to do well at Worlds, I think like Gengar is probably a Mega that I expect to see doing pretty well. I think it has a positive Metagross matchup, although Metagross have been running a lot of bulk lately, specifically to live that Gengar Shadow Ball, so it's not like a extremely I'm gonna beat every Metagross kind of matchup with Gengar, but, you know, as long as you get a little bit of chip damage on to Metagross first, you're able to deal with it pretty consistently. So I think that Gengar probably has the most room to work with outside of just, you know, the Mega choices. Like we said, that 3 or 4 Mon core that we've been seeing on most teams, you know, you can build specifically to beat those because of how strong Shadow Tag is. You can, you know, effectively target the specific Mons in that team. So you want to target the Landorus or the Kartana. You know, you can lock them in with Shadow Tag and then switch out or U-turn out with your Incineroar or your Landorus, and, you know, just try and pick off favorable matchups that way. Just because we know a certain amount of teams in this format will be, you know, running those Pokemon, you can team build and then use Shadow Tag to beat them. So that'll be something I think is pretty interesting. That is it from me guys today. Hopefully we'll get some more content out soon. Got the new mic, so really excited to test it out a little bit more. But that is it from me guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.